So can I ask you to just introduce yourself?
Ahmed Zawi. I'm a dad of four boys living in New Zealand, in Auckland. And I'm a member of Human Rights Foundation. And we are doing a project to improving the situation of Muslims in New Zealand.
Can I ask you to tell me what your first memories of New Zealand are?
Oh, it's a hard question. You steer my pen.
If you've been living in New Zealand for the last 15 years, you will know this man. You might not recognize his voice, but you know his name.
When I came to New Zealand, I was very happy because I felt Algeria and I wanted to be far away from discrimination and dictatorship. So when I arrived to airport of Auckland, I was dreamed when I was in Vietnam that some people circulated me and they stopped me, and I saw on this dream that I arrived on a small boat with my son on sea. And when I arrived, I was very amazed because I see the airport and the water near to the. I said, "Oh, my dream, it's released." I was happy, and then I meet one policeman. He's a tall man. I said to him, "I'm a refugee. I wanted to seeking refugee in New Zealand." He said to me, "Welcome." I was very happy when he said to me, "Welcome," and I very amazed about this. And then it happened. What's happened? The bad thing for me. They didn't give me any information. They put me in prison. It was not good treatment. I didn't get any good treatment when I arrived.
Ahmed Zawi arrived in Auckland on the 4th of December 2002, fleeing persecution by the Algerian government. Facing false accusations of terrorism, the authorities detained him for 2 years. He spent the majority of that alone in a cell.
It's like hellfire and like paradise. In paradise, because when you were in isolated place, you can talk to yourself. You become a philosopher. It arrived to me to write some poems, to talk, to think about what's happening in the world. It's a lot of contemplations. Other way, it's because you can't do nothing in prison. You are in your room, you are innocent, you feel that you are innocent, and people put you in prison. What's the reason? They can't give me any right to go to the court, to accuse me. I don't know what I do. Just I try to keep myself positive and thinking about positive things, and praying and asking God to solve my problem, and so on. Yeah, I think it's hard. The prison is not. No one can say prison is a good place or a place of rest. No, it's it's hard, and they need to cover. Till now I didn't cover from this pain.
You haven't recovered yet.
It's still like a cicatrice. You know, cicatrice, what you call in
like a scar.
Yeah, like scar. Something when you still in your life. When you remember, when you give me the poems, I read it, I become yeah, it's all right.
Yeah. When he was about to be released, hundreds gathered outside the prison with flowers and placards to greet him. Inside, the inmates he spent the last 2 years with waited by the door and applauded him as he walked out.
Oh, I started to cry at that time, and I was very excited because inside I become very near to inmates in prison, and I was thinking about them. And then also I was surprised because I don't know what will be.
The question for the court today is whether the appropriate response is variation of the warrant to enable Mr. Zawi's transfer to the Mangere Centre or release on bail with conditions. We are of the view that bail is the preferable outcome.
I'm Mohammed Hassan, and this is Public Enemy. Ahmed Zawi's case captured the country's imagination. Whether you thought he was a threat and should be kept in detention, or that New Zealand should welcome him with open arms, it was hard not to take a side. It split families, caused arguments over dinner. The country was asking itself a moral question. But 12 years after he walked out of prison a free man, do Muslims in New Zealand feel any more accepted?
Another New Zealand First MP is in trouble tonight for anti-Muslim comments. Richard Pross's call to ban young male Muslims from flying on Western Airlines could trigger international embarrassment.
So when the media reported you as calling the Muslim community in New Zealand as a serpent underbelly with multiple heads capable of striking at any time and in any direction, was that misrepresenting?
It seems women wearing full-face veils have a difficult time even catching a bus.
The Prime Minister John Key under fire over accusations that he's been scaremongering over so-called jihadi brides.
Earlier on today, he's got a bunch of Wanganui residents ropeable after finding anti-Islamic pamphlets in their letterboxes. Now, we don't need to go into the details, it's the sort of bollocks you'd expect. Muslim refugees are backward, barbaric, and want to kill us.
Ahmed Zawi's case was long and complicated. He landed in New Zealand a year after the September 11 attacks and just 2 months after the Bali bombings. The Helen Clark government defended locking him up, saying he had links to Al-Qaeda, something they later admitted was a mistake. Despite getting out of jail in 2004, he was still on bail, and the Secret Intelligence Services, SIS for short, remained suspicious of him for years and didn't drop his security risk status until 2007.
When I got the passport, I feel that I'm at home, and New Zealand maybe correct their mistake about my situation. Yeah, and it's good.
It was a good feeling.
Yes, true.
Did you feel like the government or the SIS were watching what you were doing in that time?
That's their job. I can't be hostile to such. That's their job. They should do it, even maybe now.
Do you still think that you might be
Why not?
monitored?
Yeah, it's legal. No, I'm not saying. I'm not saying anything. I'm not complaining.
Yeah. Did you catch that? He still thinks he's being watched. 8 years after his name was cleared and 2 years after he became a citizen. He's not the only one who feels this way. In 2014, the government passed controversial anti-terror legislation under urgency, allowing SIS to carry out surveillance for 24 hours without a warrant. At the time, there were 80 people on their watch list, 40 who were believed to support Islamic State, and the rest needing further investigation. But others say they're being approached by SIS for different reasons.
I got a phone call from them. They said to me, they identified themselves as the intelligence services, and they told me that you're not in trouble, but we want to talk to you about your experiences overseas. So we made a time and place, and I met with them in a cafe.
This is Adam. We've changed his name and voice to protect his privacy. He's in his 20s, of Middle Eastern background, but born in New Zealand.
There were two guys. Should I identify the names, or was that? No, probably wasn't their real names anyway, but there were two guys, and it wasn't in an intimidating way. It was sort of like, let's sit down and have a cup of tea and just like discuss things like friends and stuff. They made it very obvious to me, like in the beginning of the meeting, that essentially they had been watching me, because they told me like, oh, how was your previous experience as so-and-so? And so essentially they wanted to let me know that, we've been surveilling you. And so, yeah.
And then how many times did you meet with them? Was more than once, right?
Probably about 4 or 5 times. In the beginning, it was like at a space of about every 2 weeks.
It was just chats. How you going? How do you feel about the community? Anything you're worried about? But then they started asking him to do things, including spy on his local mosque and report back. They told him money could be offered under the table. To protect Adam's identity, I can't go into a lot of detail, but the requests increased, and after a while, he started getting freaked out.
I said no to them for several of the job offers that they made. But towards the end, I got the impression that they were sort of starting to harass me.
Do you feel like you're still being watched?
Yes, but to what degree, I don't know. That's the truth. It's hard to say. I mean, they are called the SIS for a reason. I got the impression, again, I have no evidence for this, I think they were just more interested in just sort of letting me know that they're there. I don't think they think I'm a terrorist. And I don't think they would have offered me a job if they thought I was a threat.
Do you think that there are other people in the community that they would have approached, that they would have been trying to...
Oh, no doubt in my mind. Absolutely. Absolutely. Whether those job offers were as extreme as the ones that I was offered, I don't know. But to spy on the Muslim community, yeah, absolutely. They've got informants in the Muslim community. They're watching. I mean, on one hand, it's like, okay, well, they got to be aware of, you know, any shady or dodgy ideas that are going around. And so for me personally, it's like, okay, if that's just part of your job in terms of keeping the community safe, that's one thing. The other problem is how you guys actually go about doing it. They're always going to be there. Do you know what I'm saying? You know, they're watching.
But if it,
whether you like it or not.
But if it was up to you...
If it was up to me, absolutely not. I mean, who would?
He says the meetings left a lingering suspicion in his mind. Were they still watching him? Were they listening to his phone calls? Was he being followed to work or to the mall?
But you might go through an experience, and then what happens is your mind latches onto everything. So I'll give you an example. I was at a shopping mall, and this really old woman comes up to me, and she tells me that my right brake is not working, and that's where all the real accidents happen. And around her neck, she has a 2 degrees card. Now, in a normal situation, you won't think anything about it. The thing is, I'm on 2 degrees. So your brain will essentially make an association between the 2 degrees card that she has around her neck and the fact that you're on 2 degrees, and you can't talk about that with people because and the truth is, it probably is just paranoia. I don't think now that the whole situation is over, it's nothing. I don't think she was a spy. I don't think it was, but that's what I mean. But that usually happens when you start to go through intense experiences with them. If I see that now, I haven't had any intense experiences with them for the last few months. It's nothing. But when you're going through those experiences, your mind feeds off everything.
A youth worker in Auckland, Naima Ali, says Adam isn't the only one.
That case is not very isolated case. There's many cases where the youth were approached, as in they got a call from a SIS member and they're interested in hearing about someone that they're concerned about. Unfortunately, some of the youth have taken up that offer, not knowing what their rights were or what they're obliged to say and do. There's one case where there's a youth that's been harassed by the SIS because the first time he got a call from SIS, he declined the offer of a coffee and given information about someone that they're concerned about. And so they called again, and he said, I'm not interested again. They knocked on his door and asked for him, and they couldn't reach him. So they said they'll try again.
She says a 14-year-old boy in her neighborhood had SIS officers show up to his house after he posted a message on Facebook saying he wanted to become more religious. In 2015, an ad was printed in a local paper in Wellington calling for Jawasis, spies. SIS confirmed it was recruiting people in the Somali, Arabic and Mandarin-speaking communities.
What happened in the Somali community when that ad came out was that there was a lot of hostility between community members, especially within youth. We don't know who's taking up that offer. We don't know who's out there being an informant, spying on our community. I've been living in Ma'arisk for the past 18 years, and for the last couple of years, there has been a shift in the atmosphere of our community. I would say SIS have plagued our community because the youth feel a sense of isolation, mistrust within their own community. They feel that there's a big gap between our community and the youth right now, and nobody is willing to build that bridge.
Other community leaders told me the same thing. One said there was a large number of Muslims approached and asked to be informants between 2009 and 2011, with a few reporting feelings of harassment and suspicion. However, the Federation of Islamic Associations in New Zealand, or FIANZ, the country's biggest Muslim body, says while they and other community leaders are in regular contact with SIS, they've never been told that members of the public are being approached. If it is happening, it's not happening with their knowledge or permission. FIANZ says that's disturbing and they want answers. I contacted SIS to see if this was true. Their director, Rebecca Kitteridge, wasn't available to answer questions, but they sent me this statement.
We wouldn't comment on specific cases, individuals or methods. A number of agencies in New Zealand, including New Zealand Police and NZSIS, have responsibility for maintaining New Zealand's security, as well as identifying and advising around risks to national security. Agencies work closely with communities to build partnerships and ensure open and constructive dialogue.
I pressed them further about whether they do use informants and whether people in the community were offered money in exchange for information. They wouldn't say. But according to New Zealand terror expert Paul Buchanan, there's no doubt in his mind mosques around the country have been infiltrated. So, there's an appearance of community outreach, but it's clearly not working. 21-year-old Karush lives in Auckland and says while he hasn't been approached by SIS, some of his friends have.
I have a lot of innocent friends that actually wouldn't even harm a fly, to be honest, and they've been approached and yeah, man, like doing that to people who can't even harm a fly, that could lead them, honestly, to do something, that would just make them fed up or something like that,
Do you think it has a negative effect on the way the Muslim community is able to live in New Zealand?
Yeah, I think, for some people, the faith is strong, they keep their faith and, they never leave it. But for some people, it can just reach a tipping point, They might even lose their faith or they might just be a bit more careful to be open with their faith, So, and that's not good, New Zealand is a free country, is a democracy, We should be allowed to express any faith that we like,
Mahad Yusuf, another student from Auckland, agrees. He says it's becoming hard for Muslims to express their faith publicly. Instead, they constantly feel the need to police themselves in their reactions. If he posts an angry response to something in the news, someone could be watching and misunderstand.
When I walk in my khamis or when I walk down my Islamic clothes down the road, and I'm proud to be a Muslim. I walk down and I say I'm Muslim to everybody, but the looks I get and people swearing and you bloody pig, yeah, just being violent, and they're the ones who are actually being violent and being rude and being oppressive towards us. But really, on the media, we're made to look like we're the ones who are causing the oppression and we're the ones that are violent and we're the ones that just want to be negative towards the world when it's nothing like that.
What's the worst thing you've had someone say to you?
Bloody nigger or bloody Muslim, don't blow us up or, ISIS. I don't know, man. People are delusional to me these days, and in some ways I just keep to myself, to avoid drama and problems, because trying to show them the other side of Islam and try to show other side of us, my African culture, and I'm just trying to spread peace and love and unity and, make the world a better place step by step. But yeah, people have some really negative mentalities, and they think us Muslims are just, I don't know, Islamophobia is real.
While the police don't collect data about the ethnic backgrounds of victims of assault, they say there has been a spike recently in anti-Muslim attacks in the Mount Roskill area. 2 women have a full bottle of coke thrown at them from a moving car. Another girl has her hijab yanked off in the street. The spokesperson for the Islamic Women's Council, Anjum Rahman, says things had calmed down in the late 2000s, but in the last few years had gotten worse.
With the rise of ISIS and along with international events around Brexit, around American elections and so on, the level of harassment has increased again, and we know that it's especially worse for Muslim women because they tend to be a lot more visible, especially the ones that are wearing hijab. I've had instances of both my daughters actually being accosted at bus stops when they're waiting for a bus. Recently my younger daughter also, this person went on the same bus as her and then entered her place of work and further continued to harass her, and she found that experience really quite scary, and she felt that she wasn't able to respond to it because of personal safety issues. She didn't want to engage with the person in case things would escalate.
What do these instances of harassment do for young people, young Muslims living in New Zealand?
I think, especially those that are born and brought up here, it makes them feel like they're not part of society. It makes them feel like they're not welcome. And because they are Kiwis, just as other Kiwis, it really is difficult for them to deal with that kind of issue. I think for people that have migrated or come as refugees, they possibly, come knowing that they will be seen as outsiders, but for people that have grown up here, they aren't outsiders. And to be treated as such, I think, is really harmful to their well-being as well as for the rest of the country.
The young people I spoke to around New Zealand told me they felt constantly under suspicion because of the way they look and the religion they practice. Sometimes things were small, an offhand comment, a lingering stare to remind them they were different. Adam also mentioned something else to me when we met.
The other thing that I'd really love to stop is being held in the airport for 3 hours every time I come in.
How many times has that happened? Is it like a few times? Or?
Every single time I come into New Zealand since I was about 14. They'll stop me, they'll ask me questions, they'll open my bag, they will write down on a piece of paper every single thing that they find.
It's not the first time I've heard this. Back in June, I interviewed 15 people, all Muslim, who said they were stopped, searched and questioned for hours at Auckland Airport, like I was when I landed in LAX. Except I was a foreigner in the US, and these were New Zealanders. Both Customs and the Minister for Customs dismissed claims of racial profiling, saying there's no way to determine a person's religion from a passport. But for people like Abdussalam and his wife, the reality feels different.
Actually, it was last year in the winter of New Zealand. We came, me and my wife, and they stopped us at the airport, the customs. We stayed there for like 4 hours, and they checked everything, our bags. They checked each piece separately. And my wife was pregnant early stages, so she was so tired, exhausted. Actually, they opened our telephones and they checked the pictures, and we're Muslim. There are some pictures for covered ladies that we cannot show to other men. I told them we need a lady to come and check if you're insisting to check them.
So why do you think you were stopped?
I don't know. I have to ask them.
Did they explain to you at all?
At all. They said it's for routine check. So I don't know if that applies to everybody who's coming to New Zealand or it's just us. I don't know. I need answers for these questions, really. Because I think it's kind of, discrimination, or because we don't deserve that. 4 hours staying in the airport, and we had that long trip. Somebody gotta explain that.
The government is now considering a proposal to allow its information gathering agency, the GCSB, to spy on New Zealanders in some cases, giving them access to phone conversations, emails and browsing history, which they currently collect en masse but aren't lawfully allowed to check. It's also thinking about combining the agency with SIS, raising fears about whether this will give the agencies too much power. Back in 2013, a report into the GCSB found it spied on 88 people in cases that wouldn't hold up in court. All of this worries no one more than the Muslim community. In 2014, Fianz told Parliament they hadn't been consulted on the anti-terror bill, and their calls to meet with the Prime Minister had been ignored. They were worried the Muslim community would be unfairly targeted.
I know that officially we're being told that there isn't any religious profiling, but a lot of anecdotal evidence by people who are travelling of being stopped more than they think should be necessary. So I think there's two issues. One, that there needs to be transparency, and secondly, that there needs to be fairness in the way this is all dealt with. One thing that we've always been clear about is that we're absolutely concerned with the safety of all New Zealanders, and our community comes under that category of all New Zealanders. One of the suggestions that we put forward is maybe for the government to have like an advisory council or an advisory board that they can consult around these sorts of issues. We need practical and long-term solutions. We need engagement. We need to make sure that we're looking at prevention in the long term and that we have a long-term plan and strategies in place, and it's really important that government and the community are both equally part of that process in a context of mutual respect and mutual understanding.
Over the last few weeks, I met Muslims in the US, Australia, and here in New Zealand, and heard their stories. They told me about the growing sense of dread they feel about how they, their families, and their friends are seen in the public eye. That they're labelled as enemies before they get a chance to speak. That the word terrorist is something they now carry with them everywhere they go, whether in an airport terminal or a job interview. I can relate to that. As a kid, I watched a woman swear at my mum in the car park. "Go back to where you came from," she said. I watched strangers stare and frown at my sister wearing the hijab in the mall. On the day of the Sydney siege, my colleagues at work looked at me like they'd seen a ghost. It was chilling. I started this podcast to help people understand what it's like to be a Muslim in this environment full of fear and suspicion 15 years after 9/11. But also for Muslims, to help them know that they're not going through this alone.
سيعود المنتظر حتى متى أنتظر. رأيت طيفي في قرية معزولة وفي أدغالها الكثيفة أرتجل، وبينما أنا أركب برها وبحرها وأملأ نفسي من جمالها ناداني عجوز كبير كأنه الحطب.
When Ahmed Zawi was in jail, he wrote poetry, lots of it, about what he was going through. It's beautiful as it is haunting. This poem, He Will Come Back, the one I'm waiting for, was named the most important poem of 2004. This is Ahmed reading it. It goes something like this. In the dream I am traveling. I am walking in a beautiful forest. Suddenly a man calls out to me. He's a woodsman. He recognizes me as a stranger and reaches to shake my hand. I am delighted, thinking we are friends. But he stares at me, rigid like wood. He takes spectacles from his pocket and peers more closely. "You are a foreigner," he says. "I accuse you. You will die, but it will have nothing to do with me." He glares at me again, his face a grimace. "Don't worry," he says. "We will prepare for you a coffin and a shroud." Miraculously then, birds appear. They surround the woodsman and sing, "Leave him alone. He is of the people. He is the liberator. Let him go." But the axeman shouts, "He is a liar. Hear me, people. He is a liar. He must die." I wake up from the dream on notes of music. My love hears my cries of fear. "Will I return? Will I return?" She answers, "Yes. You will come back like the migrating bird traveling always home. We will pick dates together when the sun shines and showers make rainbows." Then I scream. I am racked with pain and tears, my body in agony, my mind a cauldron of fire. But when will I return? How long must I wait? How long? How long? This episode of Public Enemy was produced by me, Mohammed Hassan, for RNZ. Our executive producer is Tim Watkin, and our engineer is Jeremy Ansell. A massive thank you to all the people who shared their stories with us over this series, and to Ngā Taonga for the Zawi Supreme Court audio. You can find us online at rnz.co.nz, on iTunes, and on Spotify. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do rate us on iTunes. It goes a long way. And tell a friend or two.